All right. Well, welcome everyone. I'm attorney Peter Harbach,
And I'm attorney Sarah Cons.
and we're doing I guess this is our third webinar here. And today's topic is going to be how to prepare for long-term care with your estate plan. And this is probably the topic that we get the most questions and interest when we talk about this in seminars, or frankly, just people coming in for appointments.
That's true.
It's a hot topic, and understandably so. A lot of people are concerned that, okay, during my retirement years, I've budgeted enough to retire with. I'm set to go, but what happens if all of a sudden we have a $10,000 a month care cost? Are me and my spouse going to be okay? Is my spouse going to have to start eating Spam for the rest of their life because they, aren't going to be able to afford the regular lifestyle if all of a sudden I'm eating up all of the money with things like nursing home or at-home care costs? So we're going to do a brief overview of what long-term care looks like, and then we're going to talk about some of the solutions that are commonly used in terms of planning to make sure that you have a successful retirement, even if long-term care kind of rears its ugly head. We have a couple of handouts that are going to be, I believe, emailed to all of the registrants.
Or available for download.
Yep. And I believe they have to be registered through Zoom. I know it's not, if you're watching this on Facebook Live, we don't have the contact information to be sending this to you, but all of the Eventbrite registrants will be receiving this. So one of them is getting the house in order, kind of a graphic that works out. We're going to be talking quite a bit about the house and long-term care expenses, because probably the number one question we ever get is, what happens to the house, or is there anything I can do to protect my house? And another thing is the long-term care planning pyramid chart. And that talks about different considerations when it comes to long-term care. So everybody registered through Eventbrite is going to get those emailed after the program here. So what the heck is long-term care? What are we talking about?
Well, long-term care can mean a variety of different things. Usually it has to do with having some sort of declining issue with regard to health and how exactly that care is being provided, whether it's at home, being provided by somebody that you are connected with personally, so a family member or a friend, or you've hired a service to bring care into your home. It can mean assisted living, which is sort of an intermediate level of care. If you have ongoing daily needs that you need someone to provide some assistance, assisted living provides a place for you to stay and then allows that care to be provided within a facility. Usually when you're transitioning into something like that, you have a base rent, and then you probably have a care package on top of that that is specifically connected to what exactly you need to kind of get through the day. The highest level of care you're probably going to be considering is skilled nursing level care. That's where they have more ongoing medical needs. It's also the highest, usually the highest amount of cost is associated with skilled nursing level care. At-home care can be the most affordable type of care if you just need a couple of hours a day to kind of get you up, get you going. But during the day, you're mostly self-sufficient, and then maybe a few hours again at night, or if it's medication management, things like that, it can be a very affordable option for people. You have to keep in mind that sometimes you need to have the house converted in order to keep it a safe environment if somebody does need care. So you need to be realistic about whether or not your home is that safe environment. Assisted living can be a bit more costly, just depending on the type of care that you need. Again, base rent, usually a care package on top of that. So it just varies by the amount of care that you need. Dementia, memory care issues tend to be a little bit more expensive. Even at a lower level of care, it can be a higher ticket amount. Skilled nursing level care is the highest usually cost at a facility. At-home care can actually exceed skilled nursing level. If you're trying to replicate the type of care you'd receive in a skilled nursing facility at home, that can actually be significantly more expensive because you're paying multiple caregivers to provide around-the-clock care. So it can be quite a bit more expensive.
Yeah, and the reason for that is on average in this area, and we're broadcasting from Appleton, Wisconsin right now. The normal cost of care for an at-home caretaker is somewhere between about $22 and $25 an hour are the rates that we see. And so, as Sarah was saying, if it's a couple hours a day, that can be less expensive than going into like an assisted living facility or a skilled nursing facility. But if you're really, like she was saying, trying to replicate that care at home, and you're staffing 24 hours a day, well, then if you're paying somebody, close to $25 an hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that can end up being, $16,000 a month. And so every once in a while we get somebody who says, oh, I don't want to go to a nursing home, so I'm not going to worry about long-term care planning. Well, I've never had a client say, boy, I hope I end up having to, need to go to a nursing home. That's not how it is that people end up there. If you emptied the nursing homes for everybody who didn't expect to be there or didn't intend to be there, they'd all be empty. It's nobody's intention, but that can be where the best care is provided in some circumstances. So it's based on individual need, and you just need to be realistic that there's different costs associated with those needs. And when somebody says, oh, I'll just get my care at home, I don't want to have to pay to go to a nursing home, you have to be realistic that that can end up being more expensive than being in a nursing home in some circumstances. So that's just sort of set the issue because a lot of our clients don't have $10,000 a month in income, but they might end up having $10,000 a month in care expenses. And so that becomes a very big concern for a lot of them of, okay, how are we going to afford different things? Is my spouse going to be okay? And maybe we're both eventually going to need care. Well, if all of the funds are used up on the first one of us to need care, how in the world do we make sure that the second one of us who might need care is going to be okay and can afford care later?
That's often overlooked with spouses. They forget about the second person needing care as well. How do you make sure that you're still controlling where and how that care is provided? So it's a gap in a lot of plans.
Yeah, and one thing I forgot to mention when we started this session is if anybody has questions, you can type them in. We'll see them. We might not interrupt our session, but we'll take time at the end to answer open questions. So let us know. We'll try and be as interactive as possible, but obviously with a webcam, there's challenges that we have that an in-person meeting is more suited for.
And that's specific to the Zoom participants. Everybody participating via Facebook, you don't have the ability to submit questions in the same way.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the potential costs of care. So how are we able to actually pay for them? One of the best initial options for people to look at, the starting point, is take a look at long-term care insurance. Now, this isn't to say that everybody needs to run out and buy long-term care insurance, but everybody needs to run out and make an educated decision about whether or not it's an affordable thing and good solution for your circumstances. And so long-term care insurance, there's many different products out there. Some of them are traditional long-term care insurance where you're paying a premium, and then if you meet the criteria, which is usually associated with needing help with your activities of daily living or having some kind of significant cognitive condition, well, then the policy will start paying out, and it can be used towards care at home, care in assisted living, care in skilled nursing. There's also hybrid products that are tied to like annuities or life insurance, where the product maybe has a death benefit, but you can access it early if you face long-term care expenses. And sometimes it's a multiple of what your death benefit might be. So lots of different types of products out there that you should become familiar with if you're concerned about long-term care expenses. One of the issues that we have a tendency to run into is that people don't get adequately concerned until so late in life that maybe they have more limited options under long-term care insurance, or maybe they're not insurable because the insurance companies certainly are smart enough to say, well, wait a minute, this person's 83 and they're in decline, they have a decline of health. We're not going to insure that person because we're just going to have to start paying out on this insurance next year. So this is something that time does not solve this, meaning you're never going to become younger or maybe more insurable than you are right now. So now would be the time to take a look at, is this a good option? And again, it's not everybody has to run out and buy it. I understand that you can't eat your long-term care insurance, meaning you can't allocate your grocery shopping money just to buy insurance. But if you are concerned about this and you're young enough and insurable enough that this might be the perfect solution for you.
Make sure that you consider what your level of income is. So if one of you needs some sort of ongoing care, how much of your income needs to go to support your spouse in the household versus how much is available to spend on care costs. That helps you determine what that insurability level is. How much extra per month do you need? What other benefits might be available to you? Do you have maybe benefits through the VA that you could access at this point or that your spouse could? So it's important to be informed. And in order to make an informed decision about this, you need a quote that's specific to your health history, your situation, your level of income. So talk to your financial advisor about it or your insurance agent. They're going to be able to give you the best picture of what it is that might be best for you.
Mm-hmm. And we don't sell the insurance, so this is an objective thing that we're telling you. It's not a sales pitch. So take a look at it and see whether or not it's something that can be good for you and your family. And if the answer is yes, well, you also should know, okay, what does this cover? I have a lot of clients who they maybe have invested in long-term care insurance for a number of years. Oh yeah, I got that policy back 20 years ago, so I'm all set. Well, a lot of people don't realize what the policy benefit might actually be. They haven't looked at their policy in a number of years. And the costs of care have trended upward significantly over the last 20 years. And so the policy might be paying out, say, $100 a day, which is wonderful, but your cost of care might end up being $350 a day. Well, and for policies that don't have an inflation rider, meaning there's nothing that is making the policy grow over time, it's nice to have that $100 a day, but if you still have to pay $250 a day out of pocket, you might not be in as good a position as you expected. And so the point here is make sure if you have long-term care insurance, you know what you have, how well you are covered, because you wouldn't get rid of an old policy if you've been paying on it for a while, but you might have to do other things through your planning to make sure that you're as well covered as you're expecting and that your family's taken care of.
Review it with your financial advisor, your insurance agent on a regular basis. Ask questions about it so that you're not scrambling when you're also dealing with the decline in health of maybe your spouse or a loved one, where you're trying to get all of these questions answered at that time. So just make sure you're reviewing it periodically so you know what your level of coverage really is.
Yeah, be prepared in advance. So you're not doing all that scrambling in an emergency. That can be a problem. Along those lines, when it comes to that sort of scrambling, if you are aware of the fact that it's probable that care is coming, it's good to actually start looking at facilities, before a big health event where, somebody slips and falls, maybe breaks a hip, has to go into the hospital, and then is discharged for rehab purposes and realize, oh, geez, they're never going to be able to go home. They're not going to recover to a point where home's going to be a safe environment. So now we got to go into a facility. If you have some idea, some kind of game plan about, okay, this is maybe where I'd like to go if my health requires me to transition into a facility, that takes a lot of the load off of your loved ones in selecting, okay, where do we start looking? Because there's 100 facilities in the area. How do you know you're choosing a good one?
There's a lot of focus on end of life decisions and communicating those decisions to your family members. And that's very important to do. And medical care is very important as well. But what type of care and where you'd like to see it provided is also extremely beneficial to talk about with the people that you're putting in different positions in your planning, like your medical power of attorney agent or your financial power of attorney. What is it that they're using to guide their decision making in this circumstance? When we do planning for clients, we provide worksheets for them that goes through long-term care. What is it that you would prefer? Would you prefer to stay at home? Would you prefer to go to assisted living? If the house can be converted, would you like to stay in your home? What is your social life like at that point? So what is it that your family members should be considering when selecting a facility if you are not able to participate in that process anymore? Giving them guidance that they can consult to ensure that the care that you're being provided is what you would have chosen for yourself is extremely helpful to your loved ones.
You should also know that there are services out there that can help select assisted living or skilled nursing facilities if you're thinking about a transition, because there's so many different options out there. It can be overwhelming to think, oh, I'm going to go and tour, 95 places to make sure I'm making the best decision. But there are things like senior advisors and geriatric care managers who their job is helping the family to understand their options and help with that kind of transition. Maybe narrow down the, 85 places to, okay, maybe we think these 3 or 4 are the best options, the best fits for you. Let's go tour just that group and see if we have a good fit there. So you should know that those services are out there, because probably one of the number one things that a lot of clients who are coming in an emergency are telling me is, boy, it's really stressful knowing I'm picking a good spot for mom or dad or, my brother or whoever it is that they're looking for. And they don't realize that that kind of help is out there in placement. So that can take a real burden off of you.
So if insurance is not an option for you and you're looking at mostly self-paying whatever care you might need, one of the most common questions that we get asked by family members and by the clients themselves, well, if I go to a nursing home, I want to protect my house. When should I put my kids' names on it? And we get that question constantly.
Oh yeah, weekly at least.
And there are very few absolutes when it comes to planning. But when it comes to putting your house in somebody else's name, it is almost invariably not a good option. You want to maintain control over your assets, even if you need care. And maintaining control does not happen if you're putting somebody else's name on your property. There are a variety of reasons why this can be a problem. This is a particular, I think, point of contention for Peter. So I'm going to let him go through those for you.
Yeah, that one kind of drives me crazy. Not because people are asking the question, but because of the just terrible advice that's out there on putting the house in the kids' names, and boy, isn't that a good idea. It actually comes packaged with so many different problems that never once have I said, yes, this is a good idea to just sign the house over to the kids. Number one, as Sarah was saying, there's the loss of control. If you sign the property over to somebody else, they own it, which means they control it. And, hopefully you have a good relationship with your kids and you're not worried about them like kicking you out of the house because they feel like selling it, but they literally would have the power to do that if you just sign it over to them. Probably the worst case that I ever heard of was a woman down in the Oshkosh area. And she was concerned about exactly this. Oh, I want to protect my house from the nursing home. So she signed it over to her son. And the son then started charging her rent to live there. Which he has every legal right to do because he's now the owner of the property. She doesn't have any rights on this. And so, unfortunately, he then, within about a year, had her move out because he was going to sell the place. Now, again, hopefully you have a better relationship with your kids than that, and this wouldn't be a concern. But it really just highlighted to me, boy, the loss of control in somebody's life when they do that. That's a big problem. The second thing is that, boy, if somebody, if anything happens to the new owners, if the kids are now the owners of this property and anything happens to them, a lawsuit, a creditor, bankruptcy, just they pass away, just
medical problems of theirs.
Yeah, medical problems of their own. These things, your house that you live in is now subject to the different claims or lawsuits or the estate plan of your child, because they're the legal owner. And so anything that happens to them happens to your property, which it can be a terrible burden. Nobody expects that their child might die before them, but then all of a sudden maybe that happens and your daughter dies, and now your son-in-law owns your home. And so hopefully you were nice to him over the last 30 or 40 years, because he can do whatever the heck he wants with it. Or they get sued or file for bankruptcy. They might have protections over their own home, these homestead protections, but this other piece of property that you live in, doesn't matter that you lived there for 50 years. They don't live in that property, and they don't have any homestead protections on it. And so this thing can be eaten up a lot like just cash sitting in a bank by those bad circumstances. And so nobody expects bad things to happen to the family, and nobody wants bad things to happen to the family, but these things can happen. And so we certainly wouldn't want your house subject to those types of problems. The third issue that is grossly overlooked and misunderstood is generally it's horrible tax planning to sign the house over to the children. For one, if absent any other agreement or anything, if you sign the house over to the kids, they're the ones who are responsible for paying property taxes over the properties that they own. It is not your responsibility. But most people intend to continue to pay the expenses and property taxes of the place that they live in. And so that can be a big issue, but much more than that is capital gains taxes. If you sign the house over to the kids, that's a gift. And your original cost basis in the property transfers along with the property. So for instance, if you paid, say, $30,000 for your house back in 1965, and now it's worth, say, $150,000. If you sold your house yourself and you still owned it, you wouldn't pay any capital gains taxes, because you have this section 121 of the IRS code basically says if you live there for 2 of the last 5 years as your primary residence, you have a big coupon that you can apply towards the growth in the house where you don't have to pay taxes on the sale. And for a married couple, that's a $500,000 coupon. And so in the Wisconsin area, very few places have grown more than $500,000 in value. And so that means the house, you don't pay a nickel of taxes on its sale. If you die and you own your house, your kids inherit it, and they get a basis adjustment to whatever the house is worth on the day you died. And so they don't pay a nickel of capital gains taxes.
If they sell it after you passed away and they've inherited.
Exactly. Because you owned it at your death. And so it's part of your estate, and your estate gets a basis adjustment. However, if you gift it, that's where this transferred basis comes in. And so my example of the house from 1965, you might have paid $30,000 for it. So the IRS pretends that your kid paid $30,000 for it. However, if they kick you out the next day and sell it, or wait until after you die, it's no longer yours. It's no longer part of your estate. So they don't qualify for the Section 121 coupon. And it's also not in your estate when you die, so they don't qualify to get a basis adjustment. So if you just sign the house over to the kids in my example, that person is going to end up paying close to about $18,000 in extra taxes that were totally unnecessary, because there's better solutions. It used to be that we would plan, well, not so much us, but planners would use life estate deeds, where they would say, okay, I maintain the right to live in my house, so nobody can kick me out or anything. And if I die, the kids get a basis adjustment because this thing is still part of my estate. However, life estate deeds in Wisconsin, at least, as of August of 2014, if you do a new life estate deed and you go into the nursing home and get assistance for paying for care, the state can get a claim on that home. So it's not safe from these long-term care expenses. And the percentage that the state can recover for almost anybody who's not in their like mid to later 90s when they die, the percentage that the state can get is worse than the capital gains tax from signing the house over, which was the tax I was describing before.
Life estate deeds can also create other problems for family members. So if you have older life estate deeds, the concerns about estate recovery are not the issue. The new life estate deeds have that problem, which is why long-term care is not, practitioners in long-term care are not using them anymore for this purpose. Ones that are older that were done previously can still come with problems though, because they end up being sort of anchors on the family. If you sell a house that you've used a life estate deed on, some of the funds from the sale of the house have to go back to the original owner. Well, if that person has transitioned into a care facility or a nursing home and they are entitled to some of those funds, if they're receiving any kind of assistance at that point, they end up being in a position where if you sell the house, you kick them off of the assistance, and then you have to spend through this money and get them back on this assistance. And if anybody has done an application for these types of programs, you only want to do it once. You don't want to have to do it twice. So the family then just maintains this property indefinitely. And so again, it becomes sort of a boat acre for the family. If you've used a prior life estate deed, it's a good idea to have it reviewed by an attorney that practices in elder law or long-term care planning, so you understand what options you have. There are things you can do proactively with these types of deeds to prepare for a period of time in care and make sure that your family has a game plan for how this property is going to be dealt with.
Yeah, absolutely. One other important point that people should understand is it's really common that we see people who, actually, I should back up and just say, most of the time when we're protecting the home, we're going to explore the option of using something called an irrevocable trust to hold the home. Because in a trust like that, you can say, okay, for tax purposes, I'm still the owner of this. So we still have that coupon to not pay capital gains taxes if it sells during my lifetime. And the kids get a basis adjustment if I were to pass away, but a restriction from the house having to be liquidated and spent on care costs. So that's often a solution that we're going to explore looking at when we're looking to maybe set the house aside from long-term care expenses. Much more tax efficient. And then the trust itself isn't going to go out and get in a car accident and have the types of liabilities that a child might. And also you can have restrictions from the kids kicking you out to sell the place during your lifetime.
And responsibilities associated with maintenance and upkeep and taxes. So it removes all of the problems that you have with direct transfers of things to children or family members, other individuals to hold for you and keep safe. It also avoids some of the problems that we were talking about with life estate deeds. So irrevocable trusts are really the option available for dealing with long-term care costs. If you're trying to protect certain property, whether it's a house, you can use this for life insurance or hunting land, farmland, other types of property, cash accounts, investment accounts. It's really about isolating what it is that you want to protect from being spent down in the event that you or your spouse may need care in a facility. You're trying to create options for yourself and prepare for a potential stay in a nursing home, whether it's skilled nursing, assisted living, or just paying for care at home.
So one last thing I wanted to bring up is it's very common that we talk to families who might be getting care provided by a loved one, like a son or daughter who is either maybe retired or had to quit their job in order to provide care.
Took less hours at work, took a leave of absence. We see all of these things with people trying to take care of loved ones.
Yeah, and it can be a large investment of time to make sure that you're providing good care. And so a lot of times the parents want to be paying the child in order to provide this care so that they can afford to, do this stuff in retirement or do this in lieu of their job. Because it can be hard work. And so it's wonderful that they might want to be providing that assistance and that they're getting paid for it. But it's critical that the person has a care contract in place. Even if you're contracting with a child, it is absolutely critical, because if the situation changes and later you have to go into a nursing home, if you don't have one of those contracts in place, all of those payments to the child can end up being called something called a divestment, which can have penalties associated with it. Because basically you have to have this notarized contract in place at the time the care is getting provided, so that the state doesn't say, oh, all those payments, we're going to create a penalty for every time you paid that child for all that care that they provided. And we're not going to provide any assistance in paying for your care in the facility until the penalty time lapses.
There's also restrictions on how that contract is set up, or how you're making those payments, or what you're getting paid. So it's not just about making sure that the contract is notarized before you start providing the care. It's also making sure that the terms of that contract comply with what the state requires.
Yep. So that's just a really big concern and problem that I see, because I've had a lot of meetings with people. Oh yeah, I've been staying with dad and he's been paying me for the last 2 years. Well, do you have a contract in place? No, we don't. Well, we might have a big issue here going forward with how we're going to be able to do things. So it's critical. Also, I guess the last thing we'll say about that, and then turn to a couple of questions real quick, is one of the tools that you have to have in place before the care need comes in, because a lot of times the care need presents itself because of a disability or a lack of capacity, meaning the person who needs the care no longer has the ability to sign things and make decisions. Well, the number one tool you have to have in place before that happens is a power of attorney for finances that actually allows long-term care planning in an emergency. Because we've had a lot of instances where people call us and want to sit down and talk about, oh, mom or dad's going into a nursing home and we didn't realize it was going to be so expensive. Is there anything we can do to make sure that, you know, their spouse is going to be okay? Well, the first thing I need to see is, well, you know, if mom or dad doesn't have capacity to sign things, let's make sure that the power of attorney is authorized to make decisions regarding long-term care and moving funds around. Because if the power of attorney does not explicitly allow that kind of stuff, it doesn't matter how smart we are or what kind of plan we can come up with, there's just no ability to implement that plan. And that can just be a huge problem. So if nothing else, to start with, you make sure your power of attorney provides all those kinds of powers. And I don't know about you, but I have a lot of people come and say, oh yeah, I took care of my power of attorney 15 years ago, so I'm fine, right?
Mm-hmm. It happens quite often,
Yeah.
But you want to make sure that you're having it reviewed regularly. Make sure that you're updating, refreshing that signature date, and making sure that all
the right powers.
all the powers that you
Yeah.
want are included. Usually when we're doing long-term care planning, if you want to be as selective about what it is that you're protecting, you're going to be doing it at least 5 years in advance of needing any sort of assistance. That allows you to decide what it is that you prioritize in terms of protecting. You can rely on knowing that you can protect those items fully, but you still can do things even if you don't have 5 years. And that's probably one of the most misunderstood areas of long-term care. So the power of attorney that Peter was just talking about, that's what we're looking at using. If you suddenly lose capacity and there isn't any planning done, you can still protect things as long as you have somebody authorized to do this type of planning. Mm-hmm. And they're proactive about it.
Mm.
You know,
So not all planning takes 5 years. I mean,
no,
somebody could even be in a nursing home right now and have planning done.
Yes, and you can still protect certain things for certain amounts. Usually when we're talking through this, we're trying to make sure, like we said earlier, spouses are going to be okay. They have enough money to live off of, making sure both spouses are treated equally when it comes to long-term care. We mentioned at the very beginning, the fact that a lot of people forget that, you know, the other spouse might need care too. Usually if you're trying to be very selective about where you want to receive care, you're paying privately for a certain period of time to get into different facilities. And that's kind of how you get your foot in the door. And, you know, facilities need to make sure that they're able to afford to pay their employees and keep things going. So they have to be strategic about what they're doing on their end. You want to make sure that both spouses have that equal ability to get their foot in the door. So making sure you're balancing the estate so that both of them can equally benefit from that type of planning. You also want to make sure that you have money that your family can use to pay for things that you might want, like staying in your own room or not being on the first floor, whatever else the priorities might be,
Mhm.
that you're using your money to pay for those extras, that it's not your family paying for those things for you at that point. So those are usually the priorities that we're looking at when we're trying to do planning around long-term care, whether it's 5 years in advance or whether you're already in care and we're trying to do what we can.
Okay, so we got just a couple of questions here, and one of them, it looks like we relating to life estate deeds. I think we already addressed by your answer.
So the question was, what do I do if I have a current life estate deed? The best thing you can do is have it reviewed by somebody that practices in elder law.
Yep. And then another one is, my mom doesn't qualify for long-term care insurance. She doesn't have much money left and has bad health. Can I get Medicare to pay for the nursing home? And the answer is no. Medicare will only pay nursing home for rehabilitation purposes if the person is discharged from overnights in the hospital to get rehab because they have some kind of condition that needs to be improved in order to like go home, for instance. And so the absolute max on that is 100 days. But again, that's not custodial care that they're providing, it's rehabilitative care. So Medicare does not pay anything for custodial care where somebody is just transitioning into a nursing home. The program that might be used is Medicaid, which is totally different than Medicare. Medicare is like the health insurance that you receive as a deduction from your Social Security. And there's Medicare Part B and all of that. Medicaid is a different program that has income and asset limitations and might be very useful in planning for long-term care expenses, but totally, again, different than Medicare, which is the health insurance. So I think we're pretty much out of time. We should probably note that if any of this stuff is, pertains to your families in such a way that you need to sit down and talk to somebody, right now we're not doing in-person meetings, but we do a lot of phone conferences or Zoom calls with families. So if anybody needs to follow up about their own particular situation, you can feel free to contact our office. It's Hooper Law Office. And hopefully you found this to be a useful, use of your time. And I hope everybody stays safe in the quarantine.
Our next sessions are all going to be on Wednesdays starting at noon. So the 6th, 13th, 20th, 27th, and all the way up through June 3rd, we will be doing these same sort of webinars with different content and different pieces of information. Don't forget about the downloads that we talked about earlier. We also have other resources available on our website. We will have a new version of our website coming out within the next few weeks that's also going to provide some of this information on long-term care planning and some resources. So make sure that you check back to our website in the coming week if you're still looking at additional resources and information that could be helpful.
Okay. So thank you all for attending, and we hope you stay safe.
Thanks. Bye.